So when I hear that, it makes me sound old, and I don't feel old until I look in the mirror every morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really impressed that you're all here, and if this is useful, that's even better. I wanted to follow up on Robin's presentation because I was somewhat offended that she showed that photograph with all the hair and said that there was a problem in affording haircuts. I can tell you, I would give anything to have a problem with haircuts. The other point that I wanted to make is that Robin talked about injecting eyes of patients. What you may not realise is that there was 10,000 years of human effort behind the scenes that was responsible for that injection. And that's where I've spent the last 15 years, and that's what I want to tell you about. Our drugs wouldn't be developed if it weren't for what happens in industry. Most of that's invisible, but there's 10,000 years of effort that goes between the discovery and actually have something that we can give to patients. So this is what I wanted to talk about. Why research? The reason I have to say that is because when I was a medical student, I used to say, I will never go into research. I was wrong, but that's what I used to say. I used to further say that I would never go into industry. Be careful what you say. I want to tell you a little bit about my perspective on Australian training, the lessons I would wish that someone had told me as I think about research and industry, delivering to patients. Essentially, the only way we deliver to patients is because of the partnership between clinicians and industry. And so that's what I really want to focus on, and some of the challenges that we face. So why research? Fundamentally because science delivers. Even though I'm one of the critics of science and say that there is an opportunity to improve, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, science is the most effective tool that humankind has ever developed for driving progress. It's inherently self-correcting, and it tolerates self-critique, like many of the other institutions that we have in society do not. And the advances in modern medicine have been truly amazing. Let me give you some examples. So first, worldwide, in terms of increase in life expectancy, you can see that there's been an enormous increase in several hundred years across the world, but it's also including third world countries like areas of Asia and Africa. We've also seen an improvement in terms of child mortality. Look at the decrease we're seeing first, of course, in the first world, but even in countries like Chile and Ethiopia. Remarkable accomplishments. And in my area, which is oncology, or at least where I began, we're seeing an increase in incidence, the solid lines, in males and females, but we're seeing a decrease in mortality. So we're seeing this dissociation. We're seeing more cancer, but we're doing better at treating it. The sorts of treatments that are available for cancer today were unimaginable when I was in medical school. Similarly, the sorts of treatments you're learning about for rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, inflammatory bowel disease were unimaginable when I was in medical school only yesterday. At least that's what it seems like. So in terms of my training, when I was a student, an intern and junior medical officer, I was focused on learning the facts. And the role models were the people that demonstrated compliance. They were the residents and registrars who did what their consultants told them. I hope that's not the same today, but that was certainly the environment that I was raised in, and frankly, so too Robin. We had to do what we were told. It was expected that we would do what our professors told us. Then I met Ian Mackay at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute and went on to do a PhD at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. And I strongly endorse Kshitij's comment. Yes, if you're going to do a PhD, do it as late as you can in your career. And if you go on and do specialty training, definitely after your specialty training. But it does come at a price. When I first spoke to Don Metcalf and Gus Nossel and asked if I could do a PhD with them, Don said to me in his very grumpy voice, a fantastic man, "You're 27. You're far too old for me to teach you anything." I applied for an NHMRC scholarship and I didn't get it. Gus saw something and Gus provided me the salary for my first year's NHMRC grant. My salary decreased by a factor of 3 to 5 from being a registrar on the ward, having finished my FRACP, running a unit of 30 patients and the medical and nursing staff and so on, then going back to becoming a student again and being taught by a 25-year-old. It was quite a change, but I still recommend that if you can do that, that's the way to do it. From Don, Gus and Ian, I learned that it's very important that you work hard, that you challenge, debate, argue, that you work hard, that you're your own harshest critic, that you work hard, and most of all, be sceptical. Then I did a postdoc in the US for 3 years, had a fantastic time. I was at the National Cancer Institute. I returned to Australia to run a laboratory at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute and was a consultant physician at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, had a fantastic time. I became a professor at the University of Melbourne. They've taken that away from me, but I was a professor. And then I became a senior principal research fellow at the National Health and Medical Research Council. So from an academic point of view, I'd reached the top of the academic tree within Australia. I was the director of a research institute for Western Australia for a couple of years, and then I moved to Amgen, where I ran the research group for 10 years in haematology oncology. This is a biotech company on the west coast of the US. I was responsible for 5 sites throughout North America. I had 300 direct reports. I had 1,500 indirect reports. It was a company of about 20,000 people. It's the most successful biotech company in the world's history. It was a fantastic time. And there I learned how to discover drugs and make discoveries and turn them into drugs. You might want to try and guess how old I am. No, it's not 32. No, it's not 42. Not 52, another decade and you're getting close. I now, for the first time, really feel that I understand what the job is. And the point I'm trying to make is it takes a long time to learn this business. But I think I know what I'm doing now. I didn't 10 years ago, but I think I know what I'm doing now. And for a couple of years, for 5 years, I was a startup for a couple of, let's try that again, Glenn. I was the chief scientific officer for a couple of startups in the US, one in California and one in Pennsylvania, and recently returned to Australia to lead this very exciting initiative that I'll mention at the end, BioCurate. So my personal perspective, medical training in Australia is first class. Medical training in Australia is first class. You can essentially walk into any position you want to in the world. If you remember, you have to work hard. But the fact that I did my training here and then ended up running a group at the world's most successful biotech company, fantastic. That's the sort of opportunity that you have available too. The area of specialty training, if you choose it, frankly, to my mind, is unimportant. So I started off in oncology. The programs that I ran then were in infectious disease. I'm now working in Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease. The training that you get is a foundation. It's not so important. It's good if you can choose something that excites you, but I frankly don't think that that's so important. In contrast, if you choose to do a PhD, that choice of supervisor and laboratory is critically important. So that's something that's well worthwhile thinking about. It's completely different to your specialty training. Always remember that they are not doing you a favour. You are doing them the favour. You're very valuable. They see you as a pair, and when I say they, I mean me. They see you as a pair of hands that's going to work for them, that you're highly intelligent, you're well trained, you'll be industrious for at least 3 years, maybe longer, essentially free. So you're very valuable. Don't take the first offer that comes along. Choose the supervisor, not the project. And beware, the most famous lab is usually not the best lab. Be very careful how you do your diligence. Talk with prior graduates and people that have done it before, but the choice of laboratory for you to do your PhD is critically important. You're getting married to that person for the next 3, maybe 5 years. It's critically important. If you're going to move outside clinical medicine, the background is life in clinical medicine as a student, trainee, physician is very highly structured. And for good reason, because we want to deliver good patient care. So there are principles that are established, operating procedures, and so on. But if you want to step outside that, don't accept the prevailing linear paradigm. Don't accept the status quo. Think, challenge, ask questions. The professor does not know best. It's critically important to challenge. Take initiative, be bold. What's the worst thing that can happen? I've been fired 4 times. Once I fired myself, so I'm not sure that counts because we closed down the company, but I've been fired 4 times. So that's the worst that can happen. It's not really a problem. Forge your own path. Put yourself out there. Be rigorous, objective. Be your own harshest critic. Never demand of someone else something you're not prepared to do yourself. And if you're thinking about industry, it's all about teamwork. You do not want to be the smartest person in the room. The first person you should hire should be someone smarter than yourself. Skills for communication, courage, candour and commitment are critically important. Be prepared to put your job on the line. On several occasions I've been to the boss knowing full well that I might get fired for what I was about to say. It doesn't matter. I wasn't fired for those reasons. It doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. Be prepared to challenge your boss. You can't afford to be the smartest person in the room. Work hard, and if you go into research, never forget why you did it. You don't do it to get a Nature paper. You don't do it to become famous. You did it because Auntie Myrtle had cancer. You do it because Uncle Harold had a heart attack. That's the reason you go into research. It's certainly not to make money. Remember why you did it. It's critically important that that motivates you. And the single most important lesson, be sceptical. Don't believe anything anyone tells you, including me. Go to the source. Don't trust anything anyone tells you. Be sceptical. That is the fundamental lesson we need to learn from science. So, delivering to patients, that's what industry is all about. What are the important issues? The allegiance is to the company. Everyone is an owner. So when I was at Amgen, my executive assistant had shares in the company. She felt like she was part of the company and she worked like it was her company. If you're at the University of Melbourne or you're at Monash University, you never think that you're going to be taken over by La Trobe. It's not a thought that ever enters your head. If you're at the Peter MacCallum, you never think that you're going to be taken over by the Baker or the Hudson. It's not a thought that you ever have. In industry, it's a thought that you have every day. And at Amgen, we were constantly concerned that we might be taken over by Pfizer or some other company. The reason that's important is because then all the senior people lose their job. So it's not something that you really want to happen. In contrast, if you're in a small company, it's actually what you're wishing for. You're hoping, and I've worked for several small companies, that you're hoping that you will be taken over, because then you'll actually have an exit whereby all the people that lose their jobs get a golden handshake and the value inflection is substantial as a consequence. But you don't think about that in academia, but it is fundamentally important in terms of the way industry thinks. In industry, the boss has 51% of the vote. So Robin doesn't ever imagine that her boss will come in and say, you're not working on eye disease today, you're working on fertility or infertility. That's unimaginable. It can happen every day in industry. The boss has 51% of the vote. In California, you're employed at will. So my boss could walk in any day and say, you've gone, Glenn. No need to give notice, no need to give a reason, simply today's your last day of employment. So we used to have these black humour, really, jokes whereby we were delighted every time our key card opened the door for us every morning. In industry, it's results-driven behaviour. Everyone has agreed annual goals and you have to deliver against them. Typically, that would be reviewed every 6 months, but it's very clear what you have to do. And there's this can-do attitude. So I moved from academia to Amgen, And on occasions I would say to my boss, we should do this. And my boss would say, Glenn, why haven't you done it already? You've got the money, you've got the idea, go ahead and do it. There's also the realisation that drugs cost a lot to develop. The current estimate from Tufts is about $2.6 billion per drug. So there is no latitude for inefficiencies. The data has to be rigorous, it has to be tested, because we're placing a $2.6 billion investment on your idea. The single biggest difference between academia and industry is teamwork. It's all about teams. The second biggest difference is the focus on leadership. And then the third, as a consequence of those two, it's about delivering results. So you enter a company because of your academic background. That's the point that allows one to enter. But the ability as a leader is not left to chance. So I had the privilege, thank you, of having repeated presentations from Bill Clinton's communication coaches. Now, Bill Clinton, whatever you think of his politics, is one of the world's best communicators, and to have the opportunity of spending several days with the people that coached him was fantastic. It's not left to chance. The teamwork is what drives results. We have shared goals, shared incentives, shared deliverables, 3 to 6 monthly reviews. Things like secret data would not be tolerated. It's the team. And this is quite different to what you see in academia, where the principal investigator is essentially an individual entrepreneur. There's little allegiance to the organisation. I can take my NHMRC grant and I can move from the Hudson to the Weehigh. There's little allegiance to the institution. And the track record is primarily judged as an individual. Ronald Reagan said, there's no limit to what a man can do. I'm balancing the politics, for those of you that are noticing. There's no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. In contrast to academia, where there's this constant need to demonstrate individual accomplishment. One of the challenges in terms of the partnership between industry and academia is the irreproducibility of published literature. When at Amgen I reviewed what had happened over the prior 10 years, we were unable to reproduce 90% of the papers published in Nature, Science and Cell. It wasn't just that Figure 2 wasn't able to be reproduced, it was the major finding, the title of the paper, that investigators could not reproduce. Our standard operating procedure was to go back to the investigators themselves that had published in Nature, Science and Cell and ask them to repeat the experiment, and they couldn't. When we described this, we got into a lot of trouble. There was hate mail and threats, and we were told we were stupid and incompetent, both of which might be true, doesn't alter the message. And it's subsequently been confirmed by many other groups. The problem we have in academia is that there is no metric for quality. What we assume, falsely, is that publication in a journal like Nature, Science or Cell is a surrogate for quality. It's not. In industry, the real test is whether or not the drug works in the clinic, and the clinic is unforgiving. Disease doesn't just melt away. So there is fundamentally a different incentive driving industry versus academia. This is what industry thinks about academic research. It meanders everywhere. Industry well understands that when it's presented, however, it'll be presented as a linear, we thought this, we proposed that, this led to that, and so on. It's not true, but that's the way the entire academic environment, the publishing houses and so on, expect us to present the data. This is what it's actually like in industry. There are clear guide rails. If a result transgresses those, that's the end of the project. You can't continue to invest in something that you can't take forward. That $2.6 billion is hanging there constantly. Some of the things that I never expected. As a student, I told you I was adamant that I'd never go into research. I was equally adamant that I would never go into industry. My career wasn't planned. I've just had fun along the way. It's always been a hobby. I've never had a job. In industry, I was privileged, frankly, to work with the smartest people I've ever worked with, the most committed people that I've ever worked with. And as a student, I never had the opportunity to meet any of those people, so how could I possibly know? I was a guest of the US State Department, me, this kid that was born in McLeod, a guest of the US State Department, where? To Russia. We went there to try and build a manufacturing facility because the US State Department was concerned that with the collapse of Russia, all of the scientists that were actually manufacturing anthrax would be looking for jobs outside the US and would take their anthrax with them to North Korea. Amgen is the single largest manufacturer of biologics in the world. It has 20% of the world's protein manufacturing capability. What we saw in Russia in terms of anthrax facilities dwarfed anything that I'd seen at Amgen. I had the privilege to present to President Obama's Science Council, to the White House, and I've been involved in drugs that have been helped to over 30 million patients. I told you I've been fired 4 times, although probably 3 if you say that I fired myself once because we closed down the company. So I've been fired 3 times. I failed to get my first NH&MRC grant. I failed the first part because I wasn't prepared to ask a 22-year-old with diabetes about his impotence. Failure has opened many doors, so embrace it. It's not something to be concerned about. There have been more opportunities opened by my failures than I would have ever imagined might have come from my successes, and it's been a very privileged life. Biocurate is a collaborative venture between Melbourne and Monash. We've got $60 million, and our task is to take the discoveries at Melbourne and Monash and turn them into drugs. Our focus will be on reproducible data with an understanding of what really is unmet medical need, intellectual property, differentiation, and a translational path. Thank you very much for your attention. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Sure.